Right now, as you're listening to this, your body is performing about 37,000 billion chemical reactions every second. Your heart is pumping blood through 100,000 kilometers of blood vessels. Your lungs are extracting oxygen from air. That's exactly 21% oxygen. Not 20, not 22, exactly 21. Your skin is holding back an atmosphere, pressing down with 10 tons of force on every square meter. And all of this works perfectly, automatically, without you thinking about it, because your body is a machine engineered by 4 billion years of evolution to operate on one specific planet. Take that machine anywhere else in the universe, anywhere else at all, and it starts to fail. Not slowly, not gradually, catastrophically. That's what I want to explore. Not the challenge of getting to other planets. We've discussed that elsewhere. But what happens when you arrive? What happens when you try to actually live somewhere that isn't Earth? Because the universe is filled with planets. We've discovered thousands of them orbiting other stars, and our own solar system contains worlds of staggering diversity. Rocky planets, gas giants, frozen moons with subsurface oceans. But not one of them, not a single one that we've found, can support human life without technology standing between you and instant death. This isn't pessimism. It's physics. It's chemistry. It's biology. Your body has requirements so specific, so precisely calibrated to Earth's conditions that even small deviations become lethal. And the deviations on other planets aren't small. They're extreme beyond anything you've experienced or can easily imagine. Let me start with something basic. Breathing. You do it about 20,000 times a day without thinking. Air goes in. Oxygen crosses into your bloodstream through membranes in your lungs that are only 1 cell thick. Carbon dioxide goes out. Simple. Automatic. Except it only works because Earth's atmosphere has exactly the right composition, at exactly the right pressure. Consider what happens in your lungs with each breath. Air enters through your trachea, splits into bronchi, then into smaller and smaller passages called bronchioles, finally reaching roughly 500 million tiny air sacs called alveoli. These alveoli have walls so thin that oxygen molecules can pass directly through into the blood capillaries surrounding them. The total surface area of your alveoli, if you spread them flat, would cover about 70 square meters. A tennis court of delicate membrane, 1 cell thick, separating your blood from the outside air. This system works beautifully on Earth. It would kill you almost anywhere else. Let's take Venus. Venus is sometimes called Earth's twin because it's almost the same size, almost the same mass, made of similar materials. In the early days of planetary science, people imagined Venus might be a tropical paradise beneath its thick clouds, perhaps covered in swamps and jungles. Science fiction writers populated it with dinosaurs and primitive civilizations. The reality revealed by Soviet Venera probes in the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds is rather different. The atmosphere of Venus is 96% carbon dioxide at a pressure 92 times greater than Earth's surface. Standing on Venus would be like standing a kilometre beneath the ocean. The pressure alone would kill you, crushing your chest cavity, collapsing your lungs, forcing air from your body before you could take a single breath. But even if you somehow survived the pressure, that first breath would be your last. Carbon dioxide at high concentrations is directly toxic to human physiology. It acidifies your blood, a condition called respiratory acidosis, disrupting the pH balance that every cell in your body depends on. Your heart would begin to beat erratically, your brain would swell. The chemical reactions that keep your cells alive would stutter and fail. At the concentrations present on Venus, unconsciousness would come within seconds, death within a minute. And we haven't even mentioned the temperature. Venus has a surface temperature of about 465 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to melt lead, which melts at 327 degrees. Hot enough to melt zinc. Hotter than most home ovens can reach at their maximum settings. The Soviet Venera landers, built from titanium and engineered to withstand extremes, survived between 23 minutes and 2 hours before failing. The moment you arrived on the surface unprotected, your flesh would begin to cook. The proteins in your skin would denature, the same process that turns a raw egg white solid when you fry it. The water in your body, about 60% of your total mass, would flash towards steam, though the immense pressure would keep it liquid even as your tissues were destroyed from within. Death would be nearly instantaneous, a mercy given the alternative. Venus is an extreme example, but it illustrates something important. A planet can look promising from a distance and turn out to be utterly lethal up close. Venus has roughly Earth's gravity, about 90%. It's roughly Earth's size. It orbits in the inner part of the solar system, not impossibly far from the habitable zone. From a distance, it looks like it could be Earth's twin, and it would kill you in about 3 different ways simultaneously before you could draw a single breath. Mars is more forgiving, which isn't saying much. Mars has become the focus of human colonization dreams precisely because it's the least hostile option in our solar system, which tells you something about how limited our options really are. But even Mars, the best candidate we have, presents challenges that border on insurmountable for permanent human habitation. The Martian atmosphere is thin, desperately thin, less than 1% of Earth's atmospheric pressure. On Earth, at sea level, the atmosphere presses down at about 101 kilopascals. On Mars, it's about 0.6 kilopascals. This is below what's called the Armstrong limit, named after Harry Armstrong, who studied it, the pressure at which water boils at human body temperature. At pressures this low, the fluids in your body would begin to vaporize. Not boil in the violent, bubbling sense you see in a pot on the stove, but undergo a process called ebulism, where dissolved gases come out of solution and water transitions to vapor at body temperature. If you stood on Mars without a pressure suit, the saliva on your tongue would begin to bubble as it vaporized. Your eyes would dry out almost instantly as the moisture evaporated from their surface. Tears wouldn't form because the liquid would turn to gas before it could collect. The delicate membranes in your lungs, those 1-cell thick barriers that allow oxygen exchange, those 70 square meters of alveolar surface, would be destroyed as the liquid lining them transitioned to vapor, tearing the tissue apart. You'd remain conscious for perhaps 10 to 15 seconds as oxygen in your bloodstream was depleted. Your vision would narrow, darkness closing in from the periphery, then unconsciousness, then death within 1 to 2 minutes. Not from cold, though Mars is cold. Not from radiation, though Mars has radiation. From simple pressure, or rather the absence of it. Your body requires an atmosphere pressing against it from all directions, and Mars doesn't provide one. The composition is wrong too, of course. Mars' atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide with traces of nitrogen and argon. Oxygen content is 0.13%, essentially zero for respiratory purposes. Even if you could somehow survive the pressure, there's nothing to breathe. Every breath on Mars must come from a tank or a machine that extracts oxygen from something else, the atmosphere through chemical processing, the soil through electrolysis, imported water split into hydrogen and oxygen. There's no stepping outside for fresh air. There's no opening a window because there's no breathable air on the other side. The barrier between survival and death is whatever technology stands between your lungs and the Martian environment, and that barrier must never fail. The outer solar system presents different challenges but the same fundamental conclusion. Jupiter and Saturn are gas giants with no solid surface to stand on. What appears to be a surface is simply the layer where the atmosphere becomes opaque to our instruments. Descend into Jupiter and you'd fall through increasingly dense hydrogen and helium gas, the pressure mounting with each kilometre, the temperature rising from extreme cold at the cloud tops to extreme heat in the depths. About 1,000 kilometres down, the pressure exceeds 1,000 Earth atmospheres. Eventually, the hydrogen becomes so compressed it behaves like a liquid metal, conducting electricity, flowing in currents that generate Jupiter's immense magnetic field. There's no ground, there's no bottom, there's just pressure and heat increasing until both exceed anything a human being or any plausible technology could withstand. The moons of these giants offer solid surfaces, but conditions that are hostile in other ways. Europa, Jupiter's ice moon, has a surface temperature around minus 160 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, exposed human flesh would freeze solid within about 30 seconds, but you'd likely be dead before the cold killed you. The radiation environment on Europa, bombarded by charged particles trapped in Jupiter's immense magnetic field, is extraordinarily intense. An unprotected human on Europa's surface would receive a fatal radiation dose, about 5 sieverts, within approximately 1 day. For comparison, the survivors at Hiroshima received about 1 sievert on average. Europa's surface is essentially a radiation bath, sterilizing the ice, making prolonged surface exposure lethal even with cold protection. Titan, Saturn's largest moon, is perhaps the most intriguing destination beyond Mars. It has a thick atmosphere, actually about 1.5 times Earth's surface pressure, and lakes of liquid hydrocarbons on its surface. The pressure is survivable. You wouldn't need a pressure suit on Titan, which makes it unique among all the worlds we've discussed, but you'd still need oxygen because Titan's atmosphere is 95% nitrogen with no free oxygen. And you'd need protection from the cold, which averages minus 179 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, water ice is hard as granite, and methane, which is a gas on Earth, falls as rain and collects in lakes and seas. A human on Titan's surface would face a landscape unlike anything on Earth. Orange skies tinted by complex organic molecules in the atmospheric haze, lakes of liquid methane and ethane stretching to horizons closer than Earth's due to the moon's smaller size, only about 40% of Earth's diameter. Mountains of water ice harder than rock in those temperatures, and cold so intense that your breath, if you somehow had air to breathe, would instantly freeze into a fog of ice crystals. This is what we face when we talk about living on another planet. Not abstract challenges to be solved with clever engineering. Specific, physical, chemical realities that will kill human bodies through well-understood mechanisms. Pressure that crushes you on Venus or allows your blood to boil on Mars. Atmospheres that poison with carbon dioxide or suffocate with nitrogen or simply don't exist at all. Temperatures that cook your proteins or freeze your tissues solid. Radiation that tears through DNA, causing mutations and cancers. Each planet presents its own combination of lethal factors, and every planet we've examined presents some combination of them. Earth isn't just habitable. It's habitable in ways so specific, so precisely calibrated that we barely notice them. The oxygen level that allows fire but doesn't make everything explosively flammable. The pressure that keeps our blood liquid without crushing our skeletal structure. The temperature range that allows water to exist in all 3 phases at the surface. Sometimes in the same location on the same day. The magnetic field that shields us from solar radiation. The ozone layer that blocks ultraviolet light that would otherwise cause skin cancer and cataracts and crop failures. We swim in these conditions like fish in water, completely unaware of them until we try to leave. Every day on Earth, you consume about 2,000 calories of food and drink, roughly 2 litres of water. You do this without much thought. Food comes from farms and supermarkets. Water comes from taps and bottles. Behind these simple acts lies an enormous infrastructure of agriculture, transportation, purification, and distribution. But more fundamentally, behind all of it lies Earth itself, the soil that grows crops, the rain that fills reservoirs, the sunlight that powers photosynthesis, the nitrogen cycle that keeps soil fertile, the carbon cycle that regulates atmospheric composition. Take away any of these and the entire system collapses. On another planet, you'd have to recreate all of it from scratch. Every calorie, every drop of water, every breath of oxygen. And the planets we might colonize offer almost nothing to work with. Consider water first, because water is life. Your body is about 60% water by mass. Every chemical reaction in your cells happens in water. You can survive weeks without food, but only about 3 days without water. On Earth, water is everywhere. Oceans cover 71% of the surface. Clouds drift overhead. Rain falls. Rivers flow. Even deserts have underground aquifers. We're so accustomed to abundant water that we waste it thoughtlessly. Mars has water, but not in any form you could drink. There's ice at the polar caps mixed with frozen carbon dioxide. There's ice buried beneath the surface at higher latitudes mixed with soil and rock. There may be traces of moisture in the atmosphere, though the total water content in the entire Martian atmosphere is less than what you'd find in a small swimming pool. To get usable water on Mars, you'd need to mine ice from frozen ground, heat it to extract liquid, filter out the perchlorates and other contaminants that saturate Martian soil, and store it in sealed containers to prevent it from boiling away in the low pressure. The perchlorates deserve special attention because they illustrate the hidden dangers of alien environments. Perchlorate compounds are chlorine-based molecules that are toxic to humans. They interfere with thyroid function, disrupting the hormones that regulate metabolism. Long-term exposure causes serious health problems. And perchlorates are everywhere on Mars, distributed through the soil at concentrations ranging from 0.5 to 1% by mass. Every handful of Martian dirt contains enough perchlorate to be medically significant. Any water extracted from Martian ice or soil would need to be carefully processed to remove these compounds before humans could safely drink it. Venus has no accessible water at all. The surface is so hot that any water would exist only as vapour, and even that has largely been lost to space over billions of years. The clouds of Venus contain droplets, but those droplets are sulfuric acid, not water. Concentrated sulfuric acid that would dissolve organic tissue on contact. There's no scenario in which Venus provides water for human colonists. The outer solar system has abundant water, but in forms that present their own challenges. Europa's subsurface ocean contains more liquid water than all of Earth's oceans combined. But that water is beneath 10 to 30 kilometres of ice, in an ocean that might be over 100 kilometres deep, at pressures exceeding anything in Earth's oceans. Accessing it would require drilling through kilometres of ice in temperatures of minus 160 degrees Celsius, maintaining a shaft against the pressure differential, and somehow bringing water to the surface without it freezing solid in the pipes. Theoretically possible, practically nightmarish. Titan has lakes and seas, but they're filled with liquid methane and ethane, not water. Water on Titan exists as ice, frozen harder than steel at those temperatures. You could theoretically mine water ice on Titan and melt it, but the energy requirements would be substantial, and you'd still need to import or manufacture the oxygen to make it drinkable. Nothing about water acquisition on any of these worlds is simple. Food presents even greater challenges. On Earth, agriculture depends on a complex web of factors that we take entirely for granted. Soil that contains organic matter and microorganisms, appropriate temperature ranges for plant growth, a day-night cycle that plants have evolved to exploit, adequate sunlight for photosynthesis, rainfall or irrigation, pollinators for many crops, the nitrogen cycle that converts atmospheric nitrogen into forms plants can absorb, remove any single factor and crop yields plummet, remove several and agriculture becomes impossible. Mars receives about 43% of the sunlight that Earth does. That's enough for some photosynthesis, but plants would grow more slowly. The day length is similar to Earth's, about 24 hours and 37 minutes, which is actually convenient for both plants and human circadian rhythms. But the soil is sterile, containing no organic matter and no microorganisms. It's also toxic, saturated with those perchlorates we discussed. Before you could grow anything in Martian soil, you'd need to wash out the perchlorates, add organic matter, introduce soil bacteria, and somehow maintain temperature and pressure conditions that plants can survive. The most realistic approach for Mars agriculture involves hydroponics or aeroponics, growing plants in nutrient solutions or misted environments rather than soil. This eliminates the soil toxicity problem but creates others. Hydroponic systems require precise control of nutrient concentrations, pH levels, temperature, and lighting. They require water, which must be carefully recycled because you can't afford to waste any. They require fertilizers, which must either be brought from Earth or manufactured locally from Martian resources. And they require energy, substantial amounts of it, to power the lights and pumps and climate control systems that keep plants alive. A single person requires roughly 2,000 calories per day, about 730,000 calories per year. To produce this through hydroponic agriculture would require somewhere between 50 and 200 square meters of growing space per person, depending on what crops you grow and how efficiently you manage the system. A colony of 100 people would need at minimum 5,000 square meters of pressurized, climate-controlled, artificially lit agricultural space. That's larger than a football field, all of it sealed against the Martian environment, all of it requiring continuous power and maintenance. And this system would need to work perfectly, continuously, for years or decades without significant resupply from Earth. One failure in the lighting system could kill crops before replacement parts arrive. One contamination event could wipe out harvests. One imbalance in nutrient solution could stunt growth across the entire operation. The margin for error in space agriculture is essentially zero, and humans have never maintained any agricultural system with zero failures over multi-year timescales. The outer solar system makes agriculture even harder. Titan receives only about 1% of the sunlight that Earth does. Natural light farming is impossible. Every photon for photosynthesis would need to come from artificial lights powered by nuclear reactors or some other energy source. The cold would require constant heating. The thick atmosphere actually helps with pressure, but you'd still need to maintain oxygen levels and filter out the nitrogen and methane that dominate Titan's air. Europa offers no sunlight at all for practical purposes. It's so far from the sun and so heavily irradiated by Jupiter's magnetic field that any agriculture would need to be conducted deep underground, entirely dependent on artificial lighting and nuclear power. The energy requirements would be immense. The infrastructure required would be staggering. Feeding even a small colony would require industrial-scale operations in an environment that actively resists every aspect of the endeavour. This brings us to a fundamental problem that underlies both water and food acquisition: energy. Everything humans need to survive on another planet requires energy. Extracting water from ice requires energy to heat it. Purifying water requires energy to run filtration systems. Growing food requires energy for lights, pumps, and climate control. Maintaining breathable atmospheres requires energy to run oxygen generation and carbon dioxide scrubbing systems. Heating habitats requires energy. Manufacturing equipment and spare parts requires energy. Everything requires energy, constantly, without interruption. On Earth, we have abundant energy sources. Fossil fuels accumulated over hundreds of millions of years. Solar radiation intercepted by 510 million square kilometres of planetary surface. Wind driven by differential solar heating. Hydroelectric power from rainfall collected by gravity. Nuclear fuel extracted from the crust. Geothermal energy from radioactive decay in the mantle. We've built civilizations on this energy abundance, and we rarely consider how exceptional it is. Mars has solar energy, but at reduced intensity and with complications. Dust storms can blanket the planet for months, reducing solar input to a fraction of normal. The Opportunity rover was killed by a global dust storm in 2018 that blocked enough sunlight to drain its batteries. Human colonists dependent on solar power would face the same vulnerability. A months-long dust storm could reduce power generation by 90% or more, threatening life support systems and agricultural operations alike. Nuclear power is the most reliable option for long-term Mars habitation. Small fission reactors could provide continuous power regardless of dust storms or day-night cycles. NASA has been developing the Killer Power project, a small reactor designed for space applications that could generate about 10 kilowatts continuously. A Mars colony might need dozens of such reactors, or larger systems that don't yet exist. The fuel would need to be transported from Earth at enormous cost, or somehow extracted from Martian resources, which presents its own challenges. The outer solar system makes solar power essentially irrelevant. Titan receives so little sunlight that solar panels would be nearly useless. Nuclear power is really the only viable option, which means establishing any permanent presence on Titan or Europa would require establishing a nuclear infrastructure first. Mining uranium or thorium from local resources, refining it into fuel, building and maintaining reactors, all in environments where the simplest tasks become engineering challenges. This is the reality of attempting to live on another planet. Every basic need that Earth provides for free must be manufactured through continuous effort and energy expenditure. Water doesn't fall from the sky. Food doesn't grow from the ground. Air isn't freely available. Warmth doesn't come from the environment. Each of these must be actively produced every day, forever, with systems that cannot be allowed to fail because failure means death. On Earth, our life support system is the entire planet. 4 billion years of geological and biological processes have created an environment where human beings can survive without technological intervention. We can breathe the air. We can drink the water, mostly. We can eat food that grows in soil under natural sunlight. We can survive a range of temperatures without artificial heating or cooling. This is not the natural state of the universe. This is extraordinarily rare, possibly unique in our solar system, the result of conditions we barely understand and certainly cannot replicate. There's something we haven't discussed yet, something so fundamental to your existence that you've probably never thought about it consciously. Gravity. Right now, Earth is pulling on every atom in your body with a force of about 9.8 meters per second squared. This pull shapes everything about how you function. Your heart pumps blood upward against gravity. Your bones maintain density because they bear weight. Your inner ear orients you in space using gravity as a reference. Your muscles developed their strength to move your mass through a gravitational field of exactly this intensity. Change that field even slightly, and your body begins to malfunction in ways that compound over time. We have data on this, decades of it. Every astronaut who has spent extended time in microgravity has returned with measurable physiological damage. Bone density, loss of 1 to 2% per month in weight-bearing bones. Muscle atrophy that can reach 20% in legs within 2 weeks without countermeasures. Cardiovascular deconditioning as the heart weakens from reduced workload. Vision changes from fluid pressure, shifts in the skull. Immune system dysfunction. These effects have been documented meticulously on the International Space Station, where astronauts exercise for 2 hours daily just to slow the deterioration. But here's what makes this relevant to planetary colonization. Every world we might consider living on has different gravity than Earth. Mars has 38% of Earth's gravity. The Moon has 16%. Titan has 14%. Europa has 13%. None of these are zero gravity, so the effects would differ from what we observe on the space station. But none of them are Earth gravity either, and we have no data whatsoever on what happens to human bodies in partial gravity over long periods. Consider Mars at 0.38 g. You might assume this would cause effects somewhere between microgravity and Earth normal, perhaps 38% of the bone loss, 38% of the muscle atrophy. But biology doesn't scale linearly like that. We don't know the threshold below which bone loss becomes significant. We don't know if 0.38 g is enough to maintain cardiovascular health. We don't know how developing fetuses would grow in reduced gravity, whether children born on Mars would ever be able to visit Earth, whether their bones and hearts would be strong enough to function under 3 times the gravitational load they developed in. This last point deserves emphasis because it represents a potentially insurmountable barrier to true colonization. A colony isn't just a group of adults surviving in a hostile environment. It's a population that reproduces, that raises children, that persists across generations. Human reproduction in non-Earth gravity is completely untested. We've done some experiments with animal reproduction in space. Mice have been conceived and born in microgravity, but with significant abnormalities. The development of the vestibular system, the balance organs in the inner ear, requires gravitational cues that don't exist in weightlessness. The results have not been encouraging. On Mars, a pregnant woman would carry a fetus developing in 38% gravity. Would the fetal skeleton develop properly? Would the heart develop the strength to pump blood against Earth normal gravity later? Would the eyes develop correctly without the fluid pressure patterns that Earth gravity creates? Would the brain develop normally when the vestibular inputs during development are fundamentally different from what human development expects? We don't know. We cannot know without either experimenting on human pregnancies in reduced gravity, which raises profound ethical questions, or simply attempting colonization and discovering the results, which seems reckless when the subjects are human children. If children born on Mars cannot ever safely visit Earth, then we haven't colonized Mars. We've created a new subspecies of human, permanently adapted to and confined to Martian conditions. Within a few generations, Mars-born humans and Earth-born humans might be unable to interbreed or produce offspring with serious health problems. The colony wouldn't be an extension of human civilization. It would be the beginning of speciation, the evolutionary divergence of humanity into separate species, adapted to different gravitational environments. Some argue this is acceptable, even desirable. Humanity spreading across different worlds and adapting to each, diversifying like Darwin's finches across the Galapagos. But consider the implications during the vulnerable early period of colonization. The first generation of Mars colonists would be Earth-born adults adapted to Earth gravity. They would experience ongoing physiological decline in the reduced Martian gravity, bones weakening, muscles atrophying, cardiovascular systems deconditioning. Their children, born on Mars, might be adapted to Mars but unable to ever return to Earth for medical care or education or any other reason. If the colony fails, If supplies run out or systems collapse, those children couldn't be evacuated to Earth, even if rescue ships arrived. Their bodies couldn't survive the journey or the landing. This creates a one-way door that's easy to walk through but impossible to walk back through. Every child born on Mars would be committed to Mars forever, regardless of whether the colony succeeds or fails, regardless of whether they want to stay or leave. This is a weight of consequence that previous colonization efforts never faced. Colonists who sailed to the Americas could sail back if things went badly. Their children could choose to remain or return. Mars colonists would be making an irrevocable decision, not just for themselves, but for all their descendants. The higher gravity scenario is equally problematic, just in different ways. We don't have any accessible worlds in our solar system with gravity significantly higher than Earth's, but many exoplanets we've detected are super-Earths, rocky worlds with masses several times greater than our planet. A planet with twice Earth's mass might have surface gravity 1.4 times Earth's, depending on its density and radius. Living in 1.4 G would mean carrying 40% more effective body weight constantly. Your heart would need to work harder to pump blood. Your joints would bear more stress with every step. Your bones might actually become denser in response to the increased load, but your cardiovascular system might struggle to adapt. Climbing stairs would be exhausting. Falls would be more dangerous. The long-term effects on heart disease, joint deterioration, and overall lifespan are unknown, but unlikely to be positive. Exercise could build strength, certainly. Humans have lived at high altitude, where conditions are harder, and they've adapted. But there's a difference between adapting to thin air over generations and suddenly living in significantly higher gravity. The first generation of colonists would suffer. Their bodies developed for Earth would be under constant stress. Whether adaptation across generations would be sufficient, whether humans could thrive rather than merely survive in higher gravity, is speculative at best. And then there's the psychological dimension of living under different gravity. On Mars, you could jump 3 times higher than on Earth. Objects would fall more slowly. The physics of throwing, catching, and moving would be fundamentally different. This might seem like fun initially, but consider the disorientation. Your entire life's experience of how objects behave, how your body moves, how the world works would no longer apply. You'd need to relearn basic physical intuitions. Children developing on Mars would learn different intuitions than Earth children, intuitions that would be wrong if they ever visited Earth. Sports, dance, physical play, all the embodied activities that humans have developed over millennia would need to be reinvented for Martian gravity. The architecture would be different because buildings could be taller with less structural support. Transportation would be different. Manufacturing would be different. Every physical process that humans have optimized for Earth conditions would need to be rethought. This isn't impossible to overcome. Humans are adaptable. We've lived in environments from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests, from sea level to high altitude. We've adapted our technologies and our cultures to wildly different conditions, but we've always remained within Earth's gravitational field. We've never attempted to build a civilization in a different gravity, and we have no experience with the cascading effects such a change would produce across every aspect of human activity. The radiation environment adds another layer of physiological assault that varies dramatically across potential colony sites. Earth's magnetic field deflects most charged particles from the Sun and from interstellar space. The atmosphere absorbs much of what gets through. At sea level, you receive about 2.4 millisieverts of background radiation per year, mostly from radon gas and cosmic rays that penetrate the atmosphere. Mars has no global magnetic field. Its thin atmosphere provides minimal shielding. The surface radiation dose is roughly 0.67 millisieverts per day, about 100 times higher than Earth's surface. Over a year, that's about 240 millisieverts. Over a typical mission duration of 2 years or more, colonists would accumulate radiation doses that significantly increase lifetime cancer risk. Children growing up on Mars would receive these doses during development, when cells are dividing rapidly and radiation damage is most likely to cause problems. Shielding helps. Living underground or under thick regolith would reduce exposure substantially. Water tanks around living spaces could provide protection. But this constrains how colonies could be built and where colonists could spend their time. Surface activities would need to be limited. Children might need to be raised primarily underground, emerging only for brief periods. The psychological effects of living like this, in bunkers beneath a hostile surface, are worth considering. Europa is far worse. Jupiter's magnetic field traps charged particles from the solar wind and accelerates them to high energies. The radiation environment at Europa's surface delivers about 5.4 sieverts per day. That's a lethal dose in less than 24 hours. Any human presence on Europa would need to be deep underground, beneath meters of ice that would shield against the radiation. Surface activities would be essentially impossible for biological humans. Robots might work on the surface, but people would live in caves, never seeing the sky, never walking in the open. Titan is actually better than Mars in this respect. Saturn's magnetic field is weaker than Jupiter's, and Titan's thick atmosphere provides significant shielding. The radiation dose on Titan's surface is comparable to or lower than Mars. This is one of Titan's few advantages as a potential colony site. But you'd still be living in perpetual orange twilight, in temperatures that would freeze you solid in seconds if your suit failed, breathing air that doesn't exist from tanks that must never run empty. Every destination presents a different configuration of hazards. Nowhere is safe. Nowhere is easy. Nowhere remotely approaches the conditions that human bodies evolved to inhabit. And the physiological effects we've discussed, bone loss, muscle atrophy, cardiovascular deconditioning, radiation exposure, gravitational stress, these aren't separate problems to be solved independently. They interact. They compound. A body weakened by bone loss is more vulnerable to injury. A cardiovascular system stressed by radiation is less able to adapt to gravitational challenges. The human body is a single integrated system, and degrading any part of it affects everything else. I want to talk about something that often gets overlooked when we discuss planetary colonization. We focus on the physical challenges, the radiation and the temperature and the pressure, because those are immediate and dramatic. They kill you quickly if you get them wrong. But there's another category of hazard that's equally lethal, just slower. The chemical environment, the atmospheres and soils and liquids that exist on other worlds aren't just different from Earth's. Many of them are actively poisonous, corrosive, or reactive in ways that would destroy human tissue, human equipment, and human hopes with equal efficiency. Venus provides the most extreme example. We've discussed the temperature and pressure, but the atmosphere itself is a chemical nightmare. The clouds of Venus are composed primarily of sulfuric acid droplets, concentrated to about 80 or 90%. For reference, battery acid is typically about 30% sulfuric acid. The clouds of Venus would dissolve organic tissue on contact, would corrode most metals within hours, would destroy any material not specifically engineered to resist one of the most aggressive chemicals known. Below the clouds, the lower atmosphere contains other problematic compounds. Hydrogen sulfide, the gas that gives rotten eggs their smell, is present in trace amounts. Carbon monoxide exists at levels that would be toxic to humans. Sulfur dioxide, the gas released by volcanic eruptions, permeates the atmosphere. These aren't just unpleasant, they're reactive. They attack materials, They would work their way into any habitat through the smallest leak, corroding equipment, poisoning air supplies, degrading seals and filters. The Soviet Vanierlanders were built from titanium and other corrosion-resistant materials, sealed against the atmosphere, designed for short-duration survival rather than long-term operation. Even so, they failed within hours. Not from the heat alone, though the heat was brutal, but from the combined assault of temperature, pressure, and chemical attack. Building a permanent human habitat on Venus, something that would need to function for years or decades, seems almost inconceivable given these conditions. Some have proposed floating habitats in the Venusian atmosphere at altitudes of about 50 kilometers, where the pressure and temperature are more moderate. At this height, atmospheric pressure is roughly equal to Earth's sea level, and temperatures are a relatively comfortable 75 degrees Celsius. Still hot, but not instantly lethal. Still acidic, but less concentrated than lower altitudes. The idea is that habitats could float like balloons in the dense carbon dioxide atmosphere, with breathable air providing buoyancy. It's an interesting concept. But consider the practicalities. These habitats would float in an atmosphere of sulfuric acid clouds buffeted by winds that can exceed 350 kilometers per hour at certain altitudes. Maintaining structural integrity against acid exposure and wind stress simultaneously would be extraordinarily challenging. Any breach would expose inhabitants to an unbreathable, corrosive atmosphere. Resupply would require navigating through the acid clouds from orbit. There's no surface to land on, no resources to extract locally except atmospheric gases. You'd be living in balloons in an acid sky with no ground beneath you forever. Mars is chemically less aggressive than Venus, but presents its own challenges. We've discussed perchlorates in the soil, but let's examine this more thoroughly, because it illustrates how alien chemistry can undermine human habitation in subtle ways. Perchlorates are salts containing chlorine and oxygen, and they're remarkably stable at low temperatures. On Mars, they persist in the soil essentially everywhere we've looked, at concentrations that would be considered hazardous waste on Earth. The toxicity mechanism is well understood. Perchlorate ions interfere with iodine uptake in the thyroid gland. The thyroid uses iodine to produce hormones that regulate metabolism, growth, and development. Block iodine uptake and thyroid function deteriorates. In adults, this causes fatigue, weight gain, cognitive impairment. In children, it causes developmental delays. In fetuses, it can cause permanent neurological damage. The EPA's reference dose for perchlorate exposure, the level considered safe for lifetime consumption, is about 0.0007 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. Martian soil contains perchlorates at about 0.5 to 1% by mass, roughly 5,000 to 10,000 parts per million. Every footstep on Mars raises dust containing this compound. Every surface operation tracks it into habitats. Every drop of water extracted from Martian ice must be tested and treated. The oxidizing nature of Martian soil compounds the problem. The soil contains other reactive compounds, including hydrogen peroxide and various oxidizing minerals created by ultraviolet radiation in the absence of a protective ozone layer. These compounds are harsh on organic materials. Equipment left on the Martian surface degrades faster than it would on Earth or the Moon. Seals dry out and crack. Polymers become brittle. Lubricants break down. The Mars rovers have experienced equipment degradation that exceeded predictions, forcing mission planners to adapt on the fly. For a permanent human presence, this chemical hostility would be constant background stress. Every system would need to be designed with Martian chemistry in mind. Every seal, every filter, every exposed surface would need to resist oxidative attack and perchlorate contamination. The cumulative effect over years and decades of operation would likely require replacement rates, far exceeding what we planned for. Titan presents perhaps the strangest chemical environment of any world we might consider. The surface is covered in organic compounds, hydrocarbons that have rained from the sky and accumulated over billions of years. This sounds almost promising at first. Organic compounds mean complex chemistry, perhaps useful resources, but the specific chemistry of Titan is alien to human biology in fundamental ways. The lakes of Titan contain liquid methane and ethane. These are simple hydrocarbons, the same compounds that make up natural gas on Earth. They're not toxic in the way sulfuric acid is toxic. They don't corrode metal or dissolve tissue on contact, but they're cryogenic liquids existing in liquid form only because Titan is so incredibly cold. At minus 179 degrees Celsius, these compounds flow like water flows on Earth. A human falling into a Titan lake wouldn't dissolve. They'd freeze solid almost instantaneously, preserved like a bug in amber made of frozen methane. The dunes of Titan are composed of organic particles, complex molecules called tholins that form when ultraviolet radiation and charged particles break apart nitrogen and methane in the upper atmosphere. The fragments recombine into larger molecules that eventually settle to the surface. These materials are completely unfamiliar to terrestrial chemistry. We don't know how they would interact with human biology or with the materials we'd use to build habitats. They might be inert, they might be reactive in unexpected ways. They represent unknown risks that would need to be characterized before any permanent presence could be established. The water ice on Titan, frozen harder than granite, contains ammonia mixed in as an antifreeze. Any water extracted from Titan's ice would need to be purified of ammonia before consumption. Ammonia is toxic to humans at relatively low concentrations, causing respiratory irritation and tissue damage. It's also volatile, evaporating readily and contaminating air supplies. Managing ammonia contamination would be an ongoing challenge for any Titan colony. Europa's ocean, if we could ever access it, presents chemical unknowns that could be either promising or devastating for human habitation. The ocean is believed to be salty, perhaps several times saltier than Earth's oceans, with chemistry influenced by interactions with the rocky seafloor and the ice shell above. Hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor might create chemical gradients similar to those that support life around Earth's deep sea vents. This is exciting for astrobiology. It might mean life exists in Europa's ocean, but for human habitation, an alien ocean containing alien chemistry and potentially alien life raises serious concerns. Microorganisms that evolved in European conditions might be completely incompatible with terrestrial biology, neither harmful nor beneficial, simply irrelevant, or they might be dangerous in ways we can't predict. Alien pathogens that our immune systems have never encountered, alien biochemistry that interferes with our own or simply organic material that contaminates water supplies and food production systems in ways that are difficult to manage. The same features that make Europa interesting for finding life make it potentially hazardous for transplanting terrestrial life. Even the vacuum of space, the environment between worlds, presents chemical and physical hazards beyond simple lack of atmosphere. Atomic oxygen exists in low Earth orbit. Individual oxygen atoms split from O2 molecules by solar radiation. These atoms are highly reactive. They attack polymers, eroding spacecraft surfaces and degrading materials. This is why the International Space Station requires regular maintenance and replacement of external components. The atomic oxygen environment in orbit is actually more chemically aggressive than you might expect from empty space. Micrometeorites are another constant threat. Tiny particles travelling at kilometres per second pepper any surface exposed to space. Over time, they erode materials, pit windows, degrade solar panels. The space station's windows have been replaced multiple times due to micrometeorite damage. Any long-term surface habitat on an airless world, the moon for instance, would face similar bombardment. The cumulative effect over decades would require either replacement of exposed components or acceptance of degrading performance. Then there's the issue of compatibility between terrestrial materials and alien environments. We build things from materials that work on Earth, plastics that remain flexible in Earth's temperature range, metals that resist Earth's atmosphere, lubricants that function in Earth's pressure, semiconductors that operate in Earth's radiation environments. Take these materials to other worlds and they behave differently. Plastics become brittle in extreme cold. The rubber seals that work fine at room temperature might crack and fail at -100 degrees Celsius. Metals that resist corrosion on Earth might react with alien atmospheric compounds. Lubricants might freeze solid or evaporate entirely, depending on temperature and pressure. Electronics designed for Earth's radiation environment might fail when exposed to the intense particle flux around Jupiter or the unshielded cosmic ray environment on Mars. Engineering for these conditions is possible. We've sent spacecraft to every planet in our solar system, and they've functioned in environments their components were never designed for. But spacecraft are designed for missions lasting years, not decades or centuries. They're designed for minimal human interaction, not constant habitation. The step from spacecraft engineering to permanent habitat engineering is enormous. Everything would need to be reimagined for conditions fundamentally different from those we've built our entire technological civilization around. The chemical environment of any world we might colonize is not a problem to be solved once. It's a constant pressure that would erode equipment, contaminate supplies, and threaten health every day for as long as humans attempted to live there. Earth's chemistry is benign because we evolved in it. Everything else is varying degrees of hostile. And hostile chemistry, like hostile physics, is patient. It doesn't stop attacking because you've survived the first day or the first year. It continues relentlessly until something fails. Everything we've discussed so far has been physical. Temperature, pressure, chemistry, radiation, gravity. These are measurable quantities with known effects on human bodies. But there's another dimension to human survival that's harder to quantify but equally essential: the mind. Human beings aren't just biological machines that need certain inputs to function. We're psychological creatures with needs that go far beyond oxygen and calories. And when we consider what it would actually mean to live on another planet, day after day, year after year, generation after generation, we confront psychological challenges that might prove as insurmountable as the physical ones. Start with something simple: the sky. You've looked at it every day of your life. Blue during the day, shifting through oranges and reds at sunset, dark and star-filled at night, clouds drifting across it, weather changing, the moon rising, the sun tracking its familiar arc from east to west. This sky is so fundamental to human experience that every culture in history has built mythology around it. Gods live there. The afterlife was there. Navigation depended on it. Agriculture timed itself by it. The sky is not just scenery, it's the backdrop against which human consciousness developed. On Mars, the sky is butterscotch brown during the day, tinted by iron oxide dust suspended in the thin atmosphere. At sunset, it turns blue, exactly the opposite of Earth, because different atmospheric particles scatter different wavelengths. The sun appears about 2/3 the size it does from Earth, noticeably smaller, providing less warmth psychologically as well as physically. Two small moons, Phobos and Deimos, zip across the sky at odd intervals, nothing like the stately progress of Earth's moon. The stars at night would be familiar, the same constellations visible from Earth, but dimmer and hazier through the dusty atmosphere. This might seem like a minor adjustment. Humans are adaptable. We've lived in Arctic regions where the sky is dark for months. We've lived in tropical forests where the canopy blocks most of the sky entirely. But those humans always knew that somewhere else the familiar sky existed. They could travel to it. They could imagine it. They maintained psychological continuity with the rest of human experience. Mars colonists would have no such option. For them, the butterscotch sky would be the only sky. The Martian sunset, the only sunset. The shrunken sun, the only Sunday. Everything they knew about how the world looks absorbed from birth would be wrong. On Titan, the sky would be orange, thick with haze, the sun invisible except as a slightly brighter patch in the murk. Standing on Titan's surface, you'd experience perpetual twilight, roughly 1,000 times dimmer than full daylight on Earth. Saturn would be invisible most of the time, despite looming enormous in the sky, hidden by the same haze that obscures everything else. Occasionally, during breaks in the clouds, you might glimpse it 10 times larger than the full moon appears from Earth, its rings tilted at various angles depending on the season. An awe-inspiring sight, perhaps, but not a comforting one, not a familiar one. A constant reminder that you're somewhere profoundly alien. On Europa, if humans somehow established a presence there, they'd likely live underground to escape the radiation. The sky would be the ceiling of an ice cave, illuminated by artificial lights that would need to simulate day and night cycles to maintain circadian rhythms. No sunrise, no sunset, no stars, just ice above you, forever. The psychological weight of that confinement, knowing that the surface is lethal and the nearest habitable sky is hundreds of millions of kilometers away, could break people in ways we can barely imagine. Humans need nature. This isn't a luxury or a preference. It's a documented psychological requirement with measurable effects on mental health. Studies consistently show that exposure to natural environments reduces stress, improves mood, enhances cognitive function, and speeds recovery from illness. Hospital patients with windows facing trees recover faster than those facing brick walls. Office workers with plants nearby report higher job satisfaction. Prison inmates with access to nature views have fewer health complaints. This connection to nature runs deep, embedded in us by millions of years of evolution in natural environments. On another planet, there would be no nature, no forests, no oceans, no mountains covered in snow, no rivers, no birds, no insects, no rustle of wind through leaves. The only living things would be the colonists themselves, and whatever plants and animals they brought with them, confined to pressurized habitats, artificial and limited. You could grow plants under artificial lights in hydroponic bays, and this would probably help psychologically. You could keep animals if you could spare the resources, but these would be curated, controlled, engineered environments. Nothing wild, nothing spontaneous, nothing that existed for any reason other than human utility. The absence of weather might seem like a benefit at first. No storms to threaten habitats, no droughts to destroy crops. But weather is also variety, change, surprise. It gives structure to time and conversation. It connects people through shared experience. What do colonists on Mars talk about when there's no weather? The dust storms that could kill them if their filters fail. The identical days stretching forward without rain or snow or spring to mark their passage. Seasons would be different or absent depending on the world. Mars has seasons because its axis is tilted similarly to Earth's, but they'd feel different. Spring wouldn't bring new growth erupting from the ground. Summer wouldn't mean long days at the beach. The seasonal variations in temperature would be imperceptible inside pressurized habitats. The psychological rhythm that seasons provide, the sense of time passing in cycles rather than linear monotony, would be lost or would need to be artificially recreated. Social isolation compounds these challenges. Early colonies would necessarily be small, perhaps dozens of people, maybe hundreds eventually. You'd know everyone. You'd see the same faces every day in the same corridors. Romantic options would be limited. Professional advancement would be constrained. The rich variety of human society that we take for granted, the ability to find communities that match our interests, to reinvent ourselves by moving somewhere new, to simply get lost in a crowd when we want anonymity. All of this would be impossible in a small colony on a hostile world. Conflict management becomes critical when there's nowhere to escape. On Earth, if you can't stand your neighbour, you can move. If your workplace is toxic, you can find another job. If your town feels stifling, you can relocate to a city, or vice versa. Colonies would offer none of these options. The people you arrive with are the people you'll know for the rest of your life. If relationships break down, if grudges develop, if personality clashes become intractable, there's no solution except working it out. And humans aren't always good at working it out. We've been killing each other over disputes for our entire history. The psychological literature on isolated, confined environments is sobering. Antarctic research stations, submarines, space missions all provide data on what happens to people in these conditions. Depression is common. Anxiety increases. Interpersonal conflicts intensify. Cognitive performance can decline. A phenomenon called the third quarter effect appears in many isolated groups where morale drops severely about 3/4 of the way through a mission when the end is in sight but not yet reached. For a permanent colony, there is no end in sight. The third quarter effect might become a permanent state. Communication delays would sever colonists from the psychological support of connection to Earth. On Mars, messages take between 3 and 22 minutes each way, depending on orbital positions. Real-time conversation is impossible. You can send a video message and wait 40 minutes for a reply. This isn't communication in any psychologically satisfying sense. It's correspondence. The immediate comfort of hearing a loved one's voice responding to your distress would be unavailable. News from Earth would arrive with delays that make it feel historical rather than current. Over time, colonists might feel less like remote members of human civilization and more like exiles, disconnected from everything they came from. Children born on colonies would face unique psychological challenges. They would grow up knowing only the colony, only the artificial environment, only the small population of people around them. Earth would be an abstraction, a place they'd seen in videos but never experienced. They'd have no visceral connection to the planet their species came from, no memories of blue skies or ocean breezes or the sound of rain. Their psychological baseline would be the colony, and anything we might tell them about Earth would be alien to their experience. Would such children be psychologically healthy? Would they develop normally without exposure to the variety of environments and experiences that Earth provides? Would they feel trapped, knowing that they can never leave, that their bodies have adapted to conditions that exist nowhere else? Or would they accept their circumstances as simply the way things are, having known nothing different? We can't know without subjecting children to these conditions, which seems ethically questionable at best. And yet, despite all of this, humans dream of colonizing other worlds. We've dreamed of it since we first understood that other worlds existed. Science fiction has imagined thriving colonies on Mars, on the moon, on distant planets, orbiting other stars. This vision persists despite everything we know about how difficult, how dangerous, how potentially impossible such colonization would be. Perhaps this says something important about human psychology. We're drawn to frontiers. We're compelled to explore, to expand, to see what's over the next horizon. This impulse has driven our species across every continent on Earth into every climate and environment the planet offers. It seems unlikely that we'll simply accept being confined to one world forever, even if every rational analysis suggests we should. The challenges are real. The physical obstacles, the chemical hostility, the radiation, the wrong gravity, the psychological pressures, all of it is genuinely difficult and possibly insurmountable. But humans have a long history of doing things that seemed impossible until they were done. The first humans to leave Africa faced environments that should have killed them. The first sailors to cross oceans risked everything on journeys that logic said would fail. The first astronauts rode explosions into a vacuum that no human had ever survived. Each generation expands what seems possible for the next. Technologies develop, understanding deepens. What was impossible becomes merely difficult, and what was difficult becomes routine. The colonization of other planets may follow this pattern, with early pioneers suffering and dying so that later generations can live in conditions that gradually improve. Or it may prove genuinely impossible, a frontier that cannot be crossed regardless of how much we want to cross it. What seems certain is that we'll keep trying. We'll send probes and robots to characterize environments. We'll develop technologies for life support and radiation shielding and artificial ecosystems. We'll study the human body's response to non-Earth conditions. We'll push outward, step by step, learning from each failure, building on each success. And eventually, perhaps, we'll establish permanent human presence on another world. That presence won't look like Earth. The people who live there won't have the experience of life that we have. They'll breathe recycled air, drink recycled water, eat carefully grown food, live under alien skies they can never touch. They'll be pioneers in the truest sense, creating new ways of being human in environments that were never meant for us. Whether that future is decades away, or centuries, or forever beyond our reach, the question itself shapes who we are as a species. We look up at other worlds and wonder if we could live there. That wondering is distinctly human. And that wondering continues regardless of what the answer turns out to be.